Just a note that this podcast may touch on difficult themes and include some challenging conversations, so please take care when listening. This is The Widow Diaries, a podcast that holds space for the often unspoken stories of grief, love and life after loss as a young widow. I'm Caroline Winter, and like so many, I've been on this journey. So come with me each episode and hear from others who've also walked the winding path of widowhood in their own way. The Widow Diaries, for First Light Widowed support, where no story is the same and every story matters.
There are so many parts of you that need rebuilding when you've been widowed. Knowing where to start, where to put your energy can sometimes be the hardest part because it's like everything comes at you at once, and what works is different for all of us. I found routine was really helpful for me. Making my bed every morning, no matter how crap I felt, just gave me some control, even if it was the tiniest of things. I also started back at the gym when I was ready. It was a new gym though, not one that Richard and I had gone to together. And sometimes I'd do a workout, sometimes I'd just have a spa or a sauna, but always something that felt good for my body. On the flip side, I also drank way too much wine. But, hey, I was widowed. I know you're not going to judge me. For Paula Hindle, my guest today, she committed herself to holistic healing, physically, emotionally and spiritually, after losing her husband Chris to suicide in 2013, leaving her with 2 children under 5. She's now an holistic physiotherapist, exercise physiologist, integrative health coach and a yoga teacher who's found a path forward to help other women feel powerful in their bodies again. Paula, firstly, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by sharing a little about your story and how life changed for you back in 2013?
Yeah, sure. Oh, it feels like a long time ago now, actually, which is good in many ways. So my husband died by suicide in 2013 after quite a few years of him being terminally unwell with his mental health. And basically left me with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So although it had been quite a challenging few years with his mental illness and he'd been acutely suffering with suicidal ideation, it was obviously still a very big shock and quite a big trauma when it actually happened. And it happened in our family home as well. So I had the added trauma of finding him and going through that process. So that's essentially my story.
Gosh, it's hard to even imagine when you haven't been through something like that. What do you remember most about those early days?
Like your body obviously goes into shock and parts of your brain shut down as a protection. So the first probably 6 months, to be honest, are very vague. My memories would be very vague of what it was like. But one of the memories I do have was having a very strong feeling that I had to somehow find my way through it because I didn't want this to be the story for my kids. So for me, that was a really big driver. But I think I had very much the added layer of trauma on top of grief. So I think for quite a while, it was the trauma I was really struggling with, which was in some ways masking the grief, which maybe came later.
Yeah.
So initially I felt almost unsafe, actually, is a word I'd use, almost like I was just unsafe in the world and had trouble sleeping, but at the same time was very much surrounded by my friends, my family, community. So that was the beautiful side of it.
We hear widows talk a lot about grief, but not so much, I guess, about trauma. I guess on reflection, did you sort of figure out what that was and why that had had reared up at that time?
Yeah, well, the trauma aspect was finding my husband. So I had flashbacks and had trouble sleeping. I actually feared nighttime coming because I knew that being on my own and in the quiet of, night when no one's around, that was the hardest time for me. So there was a lot of trying to distract from that. And then on top of that, having, a 2 and a 4-year-old that I was trying to parent, that's a tough time for new mums in general, let alone coping with trauma and then trying to navigate a life that is completely taken away from you, the life that you thought you were going to be living. So, yeah, that was the trauma side of it. And that was something that took a long time actually to really understand, even, to be honest. I'd go to psychologists and groups that were specific for people who had been widowed by suicide, and they talked a lot about how, oh yes, it's common to have flashbacks and things like that, but finding people who could actually support me through what to do with that was quite challenging, actually.
It sounds like your family and friendship group was obviously integral in that time. I want to come back to your children in just a moment, but your husband, your late husband, his name was Chris. Can you just paint a picture for us? What was he like? What brought a smile to your face when you think about him?
You made me smile just saying his name, actually. It was really mixed, actually, because I like to remember him as the person he was probably in the first half of our relationship when I first met him, because that's probably the time before he was really clouded with his mental health demons, I guess. And I know that that's the person he'd want me to remember as well. So what a lot of people found very difficult who didn't know that he was struggling with his mental illness, they struggled because he was actually someone who was very, he was a leader in his job. He coached A-grade rugby league. He was a very motivating kind of person. He'd be the one in his company standing up, delivering the keynote speech and inspiring everyone. Basically, anyone he met, he was someone who would really look for the best in them and look to bringing out the best in people. That's just who he was. So to have this polar opposite side to him and to have someone like him go down the path of suicide was just really hard for people to understand. So that's the person I very much like to remember. When I first met him, I was only, I have to think now, I think I was only 20.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe 19 or 20, I can't remember. So yeah, young. And we were married when I was 23, so very young. But back then, I was studying my first degree, and he was very much someone who would remind me of who I was and what I was capable of, and, really wanted to bring out the best in me and encourage me to chase all my dreams and start a business, and was very excited to travel with me and have kids with me and do all of these things. So, yeah, he was an incredible person.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. It's nice to get to hear about widows' people, because we don't get to talk about them as much as what we probably would, and particularly after time has passed. You mentioned your children at the time were 2 and 4. How did you find the strength at that time while you were going through so much trauma and grief? And you said before that I guess they were your reason for kind of just pushing on. But how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely were. I would say they're still a big driver in everything I do, because, and I mean that's just innately coming from me, but I think there is a part of me that wants that for my kids, because I know that there were challenges in my husband's childhood, and I know that all that he would have loved for is to have these children raised surrounded by love and support and being allowed to be who they are and just all of those things. So that was, it was just this innate mummy bear protective instinct, I think. So, and I mean, it was very hard. My daughter being 2, I couldn't sit her down and tell her really what had happened. I can't actually remember how I talked to her about it initially, but my son, probably about 3 or 4 days later, maybe only 3 days later, I'd managed to sort of shield him from what was going on initially, which was not too difficult. It sounds a bit strange, but not too difficult in some ways because my husband travelled a lot for work. But I remember sitting him down as a 4-year-old and having to tell him that his dad died. And that is absolutely the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Even 12 years later, actually, that still makes me quite emotional.
Definitely a conversation no parent should ever have to have.
Absolutely, and to not know how you do that. I Googled a lot, actually. I Googled a lot about, everything really, but particularly how to navigate these things with children. And I was very lucky to have found myself an incredible psychologist who was specialising in suicide, and she resourced me very early on with a lot of information and books and the way to navigate this with children. And she had said to me a couple of things that have just stuck with me for life. And one of them was, you always have to give kids the truth, obviously age, appropriate. That evolved as time went on. But the second one was that my kids will be fine if I'm fine, meaning that if I can really find a way to take care of myself and my own needs, then they're going to follow me. And I can say that that has absolutely been the case. So I didn't tell my son straight away in that first sitting exactly what had happened to his dad, but certainly within the first year I had told him that he made his body stop working. And that's how I started to broach the topic of suicide with him. And then just as I intuitively felt he was ready for more information, and when he started to ask for more information, which terrified me to do that, but looking back, just like the psychologist said, the best thing that I've done is always given him accurate information. And I can really see now that children are actually so resilient and so capable of life, I guess, and the whole spectrum of life, as long as they have someone there, some primary attachment person, figure for, in my kids' life, it's me, who is there for them unconditionally, then they can handle it because I'm their anchor that can help support them through any experience and emotions that come up.
Wow. So your children, Andrew and Cleo, are obviously quite a bit older now. What kind of relationship do they have, firstly, with you? And what does their relationship look like with their dad, with Chris, even though he's not here, obviously?
Their relationship with me, I'll start with, is very close. The three of us are extraordinarily close, and I tend to see that as one of the gifts that my life has brought me, that because it is only me, I'm the only parent, which has come with enormous responsibility. And not much of a break. But the flip side of that is we just have the deepest connection and bond that I just don't necessarily always see in other families. And it's just that closeness of the three of us are just always there for each other and always together, and we've been through so much and we talk through so much. And then I don't know what our relationship would have been like, had life been different, but I just see it as the greatest gift, solo parenting. I may not have said that 10 years ago when I was in the depths of solo parenting by myself. But right now, as they're teens, I almost feel selfishly happy that I get all of them. So that's the relationship I have with them. Yeah, and with their dad, I mean, we've always spoken about him. As the years have gone by, I've been able to offer more and more stories, so you can tell them, more adult style stories of what their dad was like and funny things that he did, nice. And dares that he took and things like that you wouldn't share with younger kids. But I try to talk about him as often as possible and the things he liked and maybe traits that they have that are like their dad. So, I mean, I can only speak for what I see. I can't speak really from their experience, but I feel like they have a connection with their dad, but I don't know. I find that hard to answer, actually.
No, thank you. That's you've shone a bit of a light on that, which is quite lovely. He's still there, and that's the main thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned earlier around health and being healthy, and this is an area in which you were working prior to losing Chris. How did that manifest and develop and change after he passed?
Yeah, that's a challenging one because every widow's story is different, as you know. But for me, I was quite unwell before he died because it was an incredibly challenging time in my life for the 3 years, but particularly the 6 months before he died, because he just took a very acute turn, and for 6 months he was acutely suicidal, had a few attempts, was in and out of hospitals. So that was, with at the time an 18-month-old and a 3.5-year-old, and I was trying to run a business and trying to look after him. So I was actually very unwell. Had lost a lot of weight, had a lot of gut pains and heart palpitations and all sorts of things. So I wasn't well going into then him actually dying and grief. So it wasn't a good platform to navigate that from, but that's just what my life was. So in some weird ways, when he did actually die, although I was obviously not well, I actually put on a little bit of weight again quite quickly, which is probably the opposite to some widows. But I was very, very, very unwell. So it was almost like that initial stress of that part of my life was gone and I was moving into a different phase. But then my background is I have a degree in exercise science and I'm a physio and a wellness coach. Now a yoga teacher. I wasn't back then, but exercise was always an anchor for me and a cornerstone of my wellness. So I probably leant back on it fairly quickly because it was something that was anchoring me, particularly through the trauma, and was a way to, one, help me put some weight back on because I was very skinny back then, but it was also probably a healthy distraction instead of going down the path of some unhealthy distractions, which I also did.
You're not alone there.
I'm happy to admit that and say that. I chose a lot of unhealthy strategies, but at least exercise was something that was keeping me relatively anchored. But what I then found difficult, I was doing some marathon training at the time, and I actually really found that challenging to go out for runs, which was previously a way of buffering some of the stress I was dealing with. But being on my own running was really brutal for me because I just started to replay last conversations, have flashbacks of what had happened. And I really struggled with that because I then had suddenly lost something that was previously helpful for me in terms of managing stress and my wellness. So it took time to work through some things to be able to get back to that. But it also meant I just kind of had to park that part of exercise for a while and went back into doing some strength training, and gradually over time I was able to come back to doing all of the things that I love doing.
And so the role of physical movement was obviously really important to you. When did the likes of yoga and breath work and focusing on nutrition, when did that come into play?
The nutrition stuff basically came back into play pretty much straight away because that was fairly natural for me, and I had a focus of needing to put weight on, which was again something that was easy for me to focus on because I knew how to do that. So it gave me something to almost really become a bit, I don't want to use the word obsessive, but it gave me something to do, to make sure I was meal prepping and cooking for the kids and eating well and doing my strength training and things like that. The yoga came in because I was finding going and doing all the things like going to psychology and reading all the resources that was being sent to me and going to my support groups and all of that was great. It was helping me understand what was going on, but it wasn't actually doing anything to help me through, well, what do I do with what I'm feeling now? What do I do with the fact that I am up at night and am scared of the world and can't sleep and am having flashbacks? Like, how do you actually heal from that? And I think it was actually my sister-in-law, so Chris's sister, who had mentioned doing yoga teacher training. So I just actually out of the blue one day took a day off work and just Googled yoga teacher training, and next minute I was down in Melbourne on a 200-hour immersion and becoming a yoga teacher.
Oh, I love that.
And then later that year I ended up going to India actually and took a deep dive, and the nerd inside of me was very interested in the philosophy and how to heal trauma and nervous system regulation, because I could also then relate it to my patients as a physio and things that they were going through. So whilst I was healing myself through these incredible modalities, I was also kind of nerding out on, wow, this is such a big piece of the puzzle when it comes to supporting anyone that's going through any kind of big human experience, whether it's grief or trauma or, whatever. It's something that can really help.
And so was that the big piece of the puzzle for you that was missing? Did that help you start to feel sort of whole-ish again?
Yeah, it definitely did. Absolutely. And I think a lot of it was, the physical movement I already had, but it was actually a lot of the philosophy. So really starting to sink into a spiritual side and trying to create meaning for the experiences that I was having. So that was a huge piece for me.
Yeah, amazing. So we've kind of got the physical, some of the emotional and the spiritual all tied up there. So this to me is holistic health, right? So that's the space that you moved into.
Yeah.
And has that sustained you all these years?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And for, we're careful about advice, but for other widows, people generally, but other widows who might be finding themselves missing a piece of the puzzle, is it trying to tie up those three elements or more of those elements to have that holistic, rounded look at health that you think could be the key, or at least a helpful key?
Yeah, look, again, I can only speak from my own experience and, what I see with patients that I treat as well. But when you look at the mind, body, spirit connection, healing has to involve all three of those. So it doesn't have to be a religion or yoga or, it can be anything, whatever feels spiritual to you and wherever you can find meaning from experience. I think that's definitely really helpful, because we're always trying to look for meaning in our lives and the meaning of the experiences we have.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to go back to body image, feeling comfortable in your body. It's something that many widows struggle with, is my body, and how do I potentially put it out there again? How do I feel sensual? How do I feel sexy? It doesn't even mean having to have sex, but what was that like for you, kind of moving back into a space where you even thought about that?
I've spoken to a few widowed friends about this because I thought it was not normal, but I had thought about it very early on.
Right.
And I think, to be honest, because I think, I don't know if this has been researched, but I think it's just wanting to feel a different way. So when you have that feeling of connection and intimacy and passion and all of those things, you're not in the state of grief and heaviness, and there's this aliveness in you when you're going down the path of experiencing those things again. And it started for me, actually, I was talking to, I think, the Camp Widow group about this, actually. We were doing a dating panel, and I said, I actually accidentally started dating, and it was really not long after my husband died. But I'd caught up with someone who I knew from a really long time ago, and we just ended up just out of the blue having just this most incredible time and this amazing connection and this spark. And when you're suddenly feeling those things instead of just the depths of grief and sadness and all of those other things, it just finally makes you feel alive again.
Yeah. And was there a safety in knowing the person?
Yeah, I would say yes, definitely.
So you let yourself follow that. What did you feel like afterwards when you sort of had spent a night or just spent some time with someone else and kind of, were you like a...
I felt fine. And again, this is just my own experience, because my relationship before my husband finally dying wasn't great at that point. And we had even gone down the path of talking about separating at some point, just because the depth of his unwellness, I guess is the word I want to use, was just so heavy for a really long time. I hadn't experienced any form of connection really in terms of intimacy with someone, because you can't connect with someone who's in such depths of despair and depression and suicidal ideation. So in many ways, I had started to grieve the loss of my husband before he even died.
Yeah.
If that'll make sense to some people and maybe not to others.
Sure.
But it probably made it a little bit easier for me after.
Because, intimacy could be tricky, right? It's wrapped in grief and guilt and internal conflict, all the things.
Yeah. So I wouldn't, and I can understand that. I'd say for me, I didn't necessarily feel... I felt torn with how can you have these feelings while you're grieving someone else, but I really understood that you can hold different emotions at the same time. Just because you're feeling a connection with someone else, it doesn't negate the love you had. They're two mutually exclusive emotions, and you can hold them at the same time. It's hard to hold them at the same time, and it's confusing. So I did struggle a bit with that. Almost like the confusion of how does this work? But it's almost like when you've got a child and you're pregnant with the second one and you wonder how you can possibly love a second child as much as you love your first one.
That's a really good way to put it, because I think that there is that conflict that almost everyone who meets someone or repartners or just has, a short moment that's difficult. How do I hold the space for two? And if I said that, someone was the love of my life or my soulmate, how can the second person also? But, that just doesn't make sense. So it's I hate the word, but it's a process.
Yeah, and I guess it breaks down some of those beliefs that you may have held before, because if you have that deep belief that your first husband was, the number one, your soulmate, and then all of a sudden you don't have them anymore, well, you have to kind of grapple with, well, is that true that they were my number one and my soulmate, and that means I will be with no one then for the rest of my life? Or is it actually possible that there's other experiences out there for me?
Sure, absolutely.
But I guess one of the biggest things I learnt then early on was that I wasn't ready to actually have a relationship with someone, because there was just so much that I needed to process and get through before I could even possibly have an actual relationship with someone.
Yeah. And was that about also sort of rebuilding the relationship with yourself?
Oh, look, it was everything. I really like, my psychologist put it in a way where she said, it's not like you've had part of your house burn down and you're rebuilding that bit. She's like, the whole house is burnt down. Dramatic. But it's like you have to rebuild the whole foundation and go up again. You can't just patch it up. And that really made sense to me. Like, there was so much. I had two children who were 2 and 4. I'd closed a business down and had to work out what I was going to do with my work life. I had to get myself well again after years of being unwell. I had to process what the hell happened with my husband. How do you marry someone and all of a sudden they go through this terrible time mentally and almost become a different person and then die. Like there's so much there to unpack before you could possibly be open to be with someone else and be able to hold a relationship.
Yeah.
Because it also can't just be, what I realised was I had so much I was going through that I wouldn't be able to hold space for the other person in a relationship if they had stuff as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was never going to, that's not an even relationship.
Everyone's experience is obviously different. What are some of the things that helped you feel empowered, feel sensual, feel confident again, not just in your own body, but in the world around you?
I would have to say my spiritual path, actually. Like focusing on my wellness was really important, because if you have a physically well body, when you're working on your mind is clearer. But then you also needed this spiritual connection to be able to reconnect with who you are as a being on your own again. And then who you are as a solo mother with 2 kids. Like, who am I in this world now, and what do I want to experience moving forward? And once I started to really feel into that, I felt better going to things by myself, because initially it's hard to also go to things on your own as a widowed person too. Like, you've got so much stuff that you're sorting through. You almost feel like you're in this different world, and you go in to the normal world where they're talking about normal things, and you're not doing anything normal. You're doing, like, I used to call it the widow file. Like, you're carrying all these things around that you have to sort out and close down and restart.
So true.
And all of these things. You know, and then you go into the real world and they're talking about just everyday things, and you actually can't relate.
100%.
So it was when I felt like I called it closing the widow. I think the widow file is closed now. I don't think there's anything else like I have to kind of do to, like, it's awful to think that, but I don't know, it's so complicated. So that, and then learning to be connected to myself again, and who am I with my 2 kids, and what do I want for my life, and to feel really grounded in that. That's when I started to feel better.
And you've turned your own experiences into a way of helping others. So how do you help people move from just surviving to truly living again, which is obviously tapping into what's inside of each of them? But how do you do that?
I think a big part of it is holding space for people to share their stories and to allow them to work out for themselves what they need. I think oftentimes in society in general, we're too quick to tell people what they should be doing. I had this too. People would try to tell me what I should be doing to get better or to move forward. People should be given the agency to work that out for themselves, because we all have an inner knowing there, and we just need to be brought home to it. So whilst we need people around us to hold us and support us and make us feel safe in the experience that we've gone through, I think it's really important to allow people to take their own journey through whatever experience they're having.
I'd like to round out with a few final questions. The first one is, what, if anything, do you like to do to remember Chris?
So every year on the anniversary, for most years, we didn't through COVID, I believe, but we scattered Chris's ashes down in Byron Bay. So I would take the kids down there, and we would just spend a couple of days down there on the anniversary, and sometimes friends or family would come down with us as well. So that's kind of our special place where the 3 of us can go together and just be together. And from the beginning, from the first year of his anniversary, I told my kids today is the Celebrate Life Day, because to me, I wanted it to be a reminder that life is here to be celebrated. And I know Chris would have really liked that too. So the Chris who was the spirit beyond the darkness that he had would have really wanted that for us and for everyone that we need to celebrate life. So that's what we do.
That's beautiful. Paula, what's something that you say to someone who's newly widowed?
I usually remind them that they're safe and they're not alone and that they're going to be okay.
Perfect. And my final question, is there a quote or a line that resonates with you most at this point in your life, in your journey?
Yeah, one of my favourite quotes that I came across at some point, and I love this just for anyone, is we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. Because when you think about that, anything we go through, whether it's amazing things or heavy things like grief and trauma and heartbreak, they're all part of the human experience. So if we're going to be human and open ourselves up to all the amazing things, we have to be there for the really hard stuff as well. But beyond all of those experiences, there's a spiritual being inside of us that can always be free.
What an absolutely perfect place to end. Paula, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time and with your story.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you to all my guests for sharing their stories so generously. The Widow Diaries is hosted and produced by me, Caroline Winter from Pod Talk for First Light Widowed Support, which provides information, resources and connection for young widowed people throughout Australia. Follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode, and you can also find out more information at firstlight.org.au. This podcast acknowledges and celebrates the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which stories have been told for thousands of years and on which this podcast is recorded.